I came home on a Tuesday tired, sweaty, thinking about leftover meatloaf and maybe half a beer on the porch. Instead of peace, I found three guys digging post holes in what used to be my hydrangea bed. Not near it, not close to it in it. 3 feet into my yard like they were planting a flag on the moon. And standing there, hands on hips, sunglasses on, even though the sun was already setting, was my neighbor, but let's call him something else for this story. Grant Holloway, tech consultant, drives a matte black Tesla, talks about asset positioning at block parties. He didn't even look surprised to see me. I walked up slow thinking maybe there was some mistake. But no, not with Grant. You don't just wake up one day and annex someone's yard. That's not suburban life, that's international diplomacy. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Why are they digging in my yard?" He smiled. Not a friendly smile, the kind that stretches but never quite reaches the eyes. "Oh, that's actually not your yard," he said, tapping a rolled-up set of papers against his palm. "Survey came back last week. Turns out the original markers were off. We're just correcting it." Correcting it. Like my flower bed was a typo. Here's the thing, Grant had moved in about 6 months earlier. Bought the biggest house on the block. This sleek, over-designed glass and steel thing that looked like it belonged in downtown Seattle, not a sleepy neighborhood in Ohio. The rest of us had brick colonials and vinyl siding. Grant had floor-to-ceiling windows and landscape lighting that looked like an airport runway. He'd been upgrading non-stop, new retaining walls, an expanded driveway, an oversized deck, security cameras on every corner like he was protecting state secrets. And I'd seen him more than once out there with his contractor buddy, whispering, pointing, measuring along the side of our properties. I figured he was just obsessive. Some people reorganized their closets. Grant reorganized geography. But 3 feet, that's not landscaping, that's theft with a tape measure. I told him flat out, "That's my land." He unrolled the papers with this dramatic flick like he was revealing the Constitution. "My surveyor found discrepancies." "Your surveyor?" "My house belonged to my uncle before me, and before that it was one of the first built in this subdivision back in the early 80s. The property lines hadn't magically drifted like tectonic plates. But Grant kept talking smooth and rehearsed. "We've actually maintained this strip for years, lawn care, hedge trimming. From what I understand, that qualifies as adverse possession in some cases." Adverse possession. That's when I knew this wasn't confusion. This was strategy. I called the city that afternoon. The clerk sounded overwhelmed, cautious. "Well, if he has a certified survey and documentation, you may need to resolve it privately. Translation, hire a lawyer, spend money, fight uphill." Meanwhile, the fence posts kept going in, thick cedar beams, concrete poured at the base. Permanent. Grant would glance over occasionally, give me that little half smirk like he'd already won. Here's what really burned. It wasn't about the dirt. It was about control. The message was clear. I have resources. I have paperwork. I can move boundaries, and you can't stop me. And I'll admit it. For a couple of days I felt small. Like maybe I'd missed something. Maybe there was a technicality buried in old documents. Maybe I was the one behind. Then Saturday morning I went down into my basement looking for something completely unrelated, a box of old tax returns. And I saw the filing cabinet I'd never bothered to go through. It had belonged to my uncle, who, fun fact, had been a civil engineer for the county during the original development of our subdivision. And I just stood there staring at it because suddenly I remembered something he used to say at cookouts when people complained about drainage issues. He'd laugh and say, "This whole street only works because of what you can't see." I pulled open the drawer. Blueprints, road maps, development agreements, drainage schematics with hand annotations in red ink. And there it was, a master stormwater map for the entire neighborhood. I laid it out across my workbench and followed the contour lines with my finger. Our street sat on a natural slope. Water moved from the north and down through a controlled runoff channel that cut directly across the side of my lot, and the 3-foot strip Grant had just claimed sitting right on top of a designated drainage easement. Not decorative, not optional, legally protected. I leaned back in my chair and actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was poetic. Grant thought he'd optimized his lot layout. He'd actually built into the one part of the property the city would defend like Fort Knox. And it got worse for him. According to the development agreement, every structure, fences included, had to maintain specific setbacks from that drainage line. And I knew, because I'd watched his renovation circus for months, that his oversized deck and that garage expansion were pushing limits already. He hadn't just nudged a boundary. He built his dream upgrades on top of flood control land. I sat there in that dusty basement blueprint under my hands, and for the first time all week, I didn't feel small. I felt patient. And patience in situations like this is dangerous. All right, let's pause the movie for a second because this is where most people mess up. When someone shows up with a stamped survey and a confident voice, your brain goes straight into defense mode. You think they must know something I don't. That's exactly what Grant was counting on. According to standard procedure, when a property line is disputed, nothing changes physically until it's verified through municipal records, sometimes even a resurvey ordered by the city. You don't just pour concrete and dare your neighbor to catch up. That's not how it's supposed to work. From a legal perspective, an easement, especially a drainage easement, is an optional space. It's protected because it serves the whole community. You build on it. You're not just messing with one neighbor, you're interfering with infrastructure. And cities take that personally. Now, psychologically, this is a classic power move. This is a psychological trap. Overwhelm the other person with paperwork. Move fast. Create permanence. Once posts are in concrete, most people back down because undoing feels bigger than preventing. It's intimidation disguised as official process. Grant wasn't confused. He was banking on me folding. And here's the thing, people who rely on dominance usually assume you won't dig deeper. He underestimated how deep my basement filing cabinet went. So Monday morning rolled around, and instead of marching over to argue with Grant again, which is exactly what he expected, I made 3 phone calls. Not emotional ones, not dramatic, calm, measured, surgical. The first call was to the city engineering department. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I just said, hey, I believe there may be construction taking place on top of a recorded drainage easement tied to subdivision phase 1 filed in 1982. I have the original development schematics if that helps. Silence on the other end, then typing. Lots of typing. The second call went to the county flood control office. Same tone, just looking for clarification. I may be mistaken, but it appears a fence and elevated deck expansion are inside the setback requirement. Third call, environmental compliance. Because once you mention altered water flow, that wakes people up. By noon, there were 2 white municipal trucks parked in front of our houses. And let me tell you something, nothing drains arrogance faster than a clipboard with a government logo on it. Grant came out confident at first, sunglasses on casual stance. He thought this was another paperwork flex. He even laughed a little when he saw me standing by my mailbox like I'd called in a noise complaint. Then the inspectors started measuring. They didn't talk much, just quiet, methodical tape pulls, laser-level checks. One of them unfolded a copy of the same drainage map I had in my basement. Grant's smile faded slowly. Not dramatically, just shrinking. One inspector asked, who authorized structural improvements within the easement boundary? Grant cleared his throat. My survey confirmed ownership. The inspector didn't even look at him. Ownership does not override easement restriction. That sentence landed like a hammer. From a legal perspective, an easement doesn't care whose deed says what. It's a recorded right of use. In this case, for water. And water always wins. By mid-afternoon, they had flagged 3 violations. The new fence posts were directly inside the drainage corridor. His expanded deck extended into the mandatory setback, and the garage addition had shifted the grade elevation enough to partially obstruct runoff. And here's the part Grant didn't know. Apparently, there had been 2 minor flooding complaints downhill during heavy rain the previous month. Nothing catastrophic, just mysterious pooling. Now, it wasn't mysterious. One of the officials said it plainly. No emotion. These modifications are non-compliant. Construction must cease immediately. Just like that, the workers packed up within the hour. Wet concrete left unfinished, fence panels stacked uselessly on the lawn. Grant tried to pivot. We can apply for a variance? The city engineer finally looked him in the eye. Drainage easements tied to subdivision flood control are not eligible for variance. That was the moment. The shift. You could actually see it hit him. This wasn't a neighbor dispute, this was infrastructure law. And infrastructure law doesn't negotiate with ego. Over the next 2 weeks, it unraveled fast. The formal notice arrived first. Removal of the fence. Mandatory demolition of the deck section encroaching the setback. Partial deconstruction of the garage addition to restore original grade slope. Civil penalty assessment. Pending environmental review. Grant lawyered up, of course. Expensive firm, sharp suits, letters full of bold font. Didn't matter. According to standard procedure, unpermitted construction within a protected easement is subject to mandatory remediation. No grandfather clause, no good faith misunderstanding, especially not when runoff impact can be demonstrated. And flood control had documentation. The final estimate for compliance just over $310,000. That included demolition, soil restoration, regrading, drainage correction, and inspection fees. Insurance denied the claim because the work had been completed without proper municipal permits. That's when the house went quiet. No landscapers, no contractors, no laser levels, just stillness. I'd see Grant occasionally in the driveway pacing, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight and sharp, not confident anymore, desperate. One afternoon he walked over. No sunglasses this time. This didn't have to escalate, he said. And I remember thinking, escalate. You poured concrete in my yard. He ran a hand through his hair. We could have worked something out. That's the thing about power plays. They assume the other person wants to negotiate from weakness. But I wasn't weak anymore. I was informed. The remediation started a month later. Watching that oversized deck come down was surreal. It had towered over both our yards like a stage. Piece by piece it disappeared. The fence posts were jackhammered out. The garage wall was cut back. Soil was stripped and regraded. And then the city did something poetic. They ordered an official resurvey of both properties to eliminate future ambiguity. Bright orange flags went up. Then permanent concrete boundary markers were installed flush with the ground, city stamped exactly where they'd always been, 3 feet inside where Grant had tried to redraw the world. He listed the house that fall quietly. No big goodbye. Sold it for significantly less than what he'd paid because disclosure laws required documentation of the drainage violation history. Buyers get nervous when the word flood control shows up in paperwork. The Glass Palace eventually had new owners. Nice couple asked about garden tips. And me, I replanted my hydrangeas 3 feet closer to where they were always meant to be. Here's what's wild. I never sued him. I never yelled. I never had to threaten. All I did was let the system he tried to weaponize examine him instead. And systems, when applied evenly, are far less forgiving than neighbors. So what's the lesson here? If this was just about revenge, it wouldn't be worth telling. 3 feet of dirt doesn't change your life. But the mindset behind taking it that does. Most boundary disputes aren't really about land. They're about dominance. About who gets to redraw lines and who gets expected to stay quiet. Grant didn't need those 3 feet to survive. He needed to prove he could take them. That's a very different motivation. From a legal perspective, people underestimate how layered property law actually is. Your deed is one layer, surveys are another. But easement setback requirements, environmental codes, those are structural layers. They exist because neighborhoods are ecosystems. Drainage, grading, slope management, those aren't aesthetic details, they're safeguards. When someone ignores them, they're not just flexing on a neighbor. They're gambling with shared infrastructure. Most people fall into a trap when someone waves a set of documents in their face acting all confident. They think maybe I'm outmatched. But trust me, most aggressive moves collapse under scrutiny. Not because they're bold, but because they're rushed. And the biggest shift in this whole story wasn't when the inspector showed up. It was when I stopped reacting and started researching. That quiet pivot from anger to information, that's power. I didn't outspend him. I didn't outshout him. I outdosed him. And that matters especially if you live in a community governed by an HOA or zoning laws. Understand, this rules can feel annoying, restrictive, bureaucratic, but they're neutral tools. They protect you just as much as they can be used against you. The key is knowing them well enough to recognize when someone's bluffing. So if you're dealing with a boundary issue, an HOA conflict, or a neighbor who moves fast and talks faster, slow down. Pull records. Ask questions. Don't escalate emotionally. Escalate procedurally. Because sometimes justice doesn't show up loud. Sometimes it shows up with a clipboard and a measuring tape. What would you have done? Would you have confronted harder? Lawyered up immediately? Or would you have dug through your basement like I did? Drop it in the comments. I read them. And if you got value out of this, not just the drama, but the breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because out here in suburbia, the real battles aren't loud. They're measured in inches.